The fog in Blackwood County always tasted like rust and old secrets. Detective Elias Vance inhaled a lungful, the metallic tang cutting through the stale coffee clinging to his breath. His patrol car, a dented, unassuming Ford Crown Vic, idled on the shoulder of Highway 17, deep in the county's dead zone, a 10-mile stretch of dense, ancient forest where cell service died, and even the police radio sputtered into static. Vance was a creature of routine, a man who saw the world in shades of evidence and procedure. He didn't believe in bad feelings, but the air tonight felt heavy, suffocating, like a forgotten coat over his shoulders. He was on a routine search, a missing person, a 23-year-old hiker named Liam Bell, who'd vanished 3 days ago. Liam's abandoned SUV had been found right here, near the old logging trail. "Vance, anything but mosquitoes and your bad mood?" The voice crackled over the handheld radio, barely audible through the white noise. It was Officer Maya Ramirez, his partner for the night, stationed a mile back on the main road. Vance clicked the transmit button. "Negative, Ramirez. Just the usual Blackwood charm. Dense trees, no footprints off the pavement. And the air, it's dead." "The air is air, detective. Get back on the grid and come grab some coffee. This dead zone creep factor is a myth." "Maybe," Vance muttered, but he didn't believe it. The silence out here was unnatural. Even the crickets sounded muffled, wary. He stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under his boots, a sound that felt deafening in the stillness that he walked toward the thick tree line, the high beams of his Vic barely penetrating the dark curtain of the woods. That's when he saw it, the flash of unnatural white that was tied to a low-hanging branch, a single, clean shoelace, the kind you'd see on a new pair of hiking boots. It was too pristine, too conspicuously placed for a simple lost item. Liam Bell's missing report mentioned new white boots. Vance approached the lace, pulling out a pair of disposable gloves. As his fingers closed around the plastic tip, a whisper of static, far louder than the radio, hissed in his ear, right next to his head. He spun around, hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Nothing. Just the impenetrable black of the forest that he checked his handheld radio. Still a faint, sputtering connection to Ramirez. He looked back at the lace, pulling it free. Beneath the branch, lightly dusted with pine needles, was something else. A small, black audio recorder, the kind journalists and private investigators used. Vance frowned, picking it up. It felt cold, oddly heavy. He pressed the play button. The recording was almost pure static at first, the rhythmic, electronic hiss of dead air. Then, a low, terrified whimper, definitely a man's voice, maybe Liam Bell's, followed by a frantic, wet scrambling sound. Then, the hook, clear and chilling, cutting right through the static. A voice, not Liam's, low and resonant, speaking into the microphone, but it sounded distorted, stretched thin, like it was coming from a broken speaker deep underground. They only ever hear the silence. They never hear the sound of the silence growing. The voice paused, followed by a wet thud and a ragged, final gasp. Then, the static returned, but now it was different. It wasn't just white noise. It was a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat made of electricity, growing louder, and right before Vance could hit stop, a faint, high-pitched siren wailed through the recorder, not like an emergency vehicle, but something ancient and wrong, a sound that drilled straight into his inner ear. Vance dropped the recorder like it was burning him. He looked up at the moonless sky, his professional calm shattered. That siren, it wasn't just a sound effect. It felt like a direction that he scooped up the recorder, shoved it into an evidence bag, and ran back to his patrol car. The crunch of the gravel no longer just a sound, but a warning. The dead zone, he realized, wasn't where signals died. It was where something else broadcasted. Vance keyed the patrol car's main radio, overriding the handheld static. "Ramirez. Code 3. I have evidence. Tell the chief I'm bringing something back that is, not on the books. Stay where you are. And Ramirez, do you ever hear a siren out here?" A final, violent burst of static answered him, followed by Ramirez's strained, confused voice. "Vance, what siren? I'm getting nothing but your frantic breathing. Get back here. You're breaking up, Elias, you sound like you're in a tin can." Vance looked down at the recorder in the bag on the passenger seat. The faint rhythmic electronic pulse was still emitting from it, barely audible over the patrol car's engine. He gripped the steering wheel, turning the car in a tight, desperate U-turn. He was heading back, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the silence he had just found was only the beginning of the noise. Vance sped down Highway 17, the Crown Vic pushing 70 on the slick asphalt, the fog refusing to lift. Every cell in his body was screaming wrong. The electronic pulse emanating from the evidence bag on the seat beside him was a silent drumbeat accompanying his panic that he pulled into the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department, a squat, brick building that looked more like a defunct post office. Officer Ramirez, a young woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper skepticism, met him in the parking lot. "Vance, you look like you saw a ghost. What was the code 3 for? A misplaced raccoon?" she asked, her voice laced with dry amusement. Vance ignored her, yanking the evidence bag from the car. "I found this, near Liam Bell's truck. Black audio recorder. And a bootlace." Ramirez's professional demeanor returned. She led him through the back door and into the tiny, windowless evidence room. "Where's the chief?" Vance asked. "He's in a budget meeting with the mayor. Won't be back for hours." Vance didn't wait. He placed the recorder on the steel table, pulled out his department laptop, and connected the device via a USB cable. He needed to isolate that voice, that siren, before he brought the full, inexplicable horror of it to the chief. "Before you play that," Ramirez started, "did you really hear a siren out there?" Vance met her gaze, his eyes shadowed with the adrenaline of the last hour. "I heard a sound that was trying to be a siren. And I heard a voice that said something about the sound of the silence growing. It was on the recording." He played the file, the metallic static filled the small room. The muffled whimpers. The wet, scrambling noise, then, the distorted, inhuman voice, clear as a bell. They only ever hear the silence. They never hear the sound of the silence growing. Ramirez stepped back, a single, sharp intake of breath the only sound beside the recording. The wet thud and the final gasp played. Then came the electronic pulse, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the electrical heartbeat. What is that pulse?" Ramirez whispered. "I don't know," Vance said, his own voice tight. "But listen." The rhythmic static intensified, and then, the high-pitched, ancient wail, the static siren, drilled into the room. It was painfully loud, a frequency that felt more like pressure than sound. Ramirez clapped her hands over her ears. "Turn it off. Vance, that hurts. It's like my eardrums are vibrating." Vance killed the playback. Silence crashed back, thick and sudden that he ran a quick audio analysis program on the file. The results made his blood run cold. "Look at this, Ramirez," Vance pointed to the screen. "The vocal distortion, it's not a filter. The program is identifying a subharmonic frequency embedded in the voice. Something low, almost infrasound. And that siren, the program can't categorize it. It's too high a frequency to be a normal siren, but too regular to be feedback." Ramirez leaned closer, her eyes scanning the complex waveform. "Wait a minute. Look at the duration of that electronic pulse, the heartbeat. It's exactly 3 minutes and 13 seconds. And look at the file properties." Vance clicked on the file info. The date of the recording filled the screen. Record date, October 31st, 1987. Vance stared at the year. "That's impossible. Liam Bell vanished 3 days ago. This recorder looks new. And Liam wasn't even born in '87. Ramirez pulled up her phone, quickly typing. October 31st, 1987. Blackwood County. Her face went pale as she read the result. The disappearance of the Holloway family. The case file the chief keeps locked in the archive. The Holloway family, a notorious, unsolved case where an entire family of 4 vanished without a trace from their remote farmhouse, less than 5 miles from where Liam Bell's SUV was found. The only evidence was a pool of blood, a shattered radio, and a single word scrawled in blood on the kitchen wall: listen. The recorder isn't Liam's, Vance concluded, his heart hammering against his ribs. It's a clue from the Holloway case. But why is it showing up now? And why is it in near-perfect condition? Ramirez pointed to the waveform again. The thump, the 3 minutes and 13 seconds. What if it's a timestamp? A location? 1987, Vance said, a terrifying thought clicking into place. The archive. If the recorder is connected to the Holloways, maybe there's something in their file the chief never showed us. The sheriff's department archive was in the basement, a damp, perpetually cold space accessible only by a single metal door, secured with a heavy deadbolt and the chief's key. We need to get into the Holloway file, Vance said, heading for the door. Ramirez hesitated, looking at the door, then back at the small, humming recorder. Vance, you want to break into the chief's archive based on a 40-year-old tape found next to a missing person's car? And a terrifying, impossible siren? It's either that, Vance said, his voice dropping low, or we wait for the silence to grow. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his toolkit, his hand already reaching for the deadbolt. The recorder on the table continued its rhythmic, low-level pulse, the sound of an unanswered signal from the long dead. The lock on the archive door wasn't designed to keep out a determined cop with a hunch and a set of lock picks. Vance worked quickly, the tiny clicks of the tumblers echoing in the otherwise silent basement. Ramirez stood guard, her hand on her holstered weapon, her gaze darting towards the shadowed corners of the dusty corridor. The faint, rhythmic pulse from the recorder, left behind in the evidence room, seemed to throb in the very air around them. With a final thunk, the deadbolt slid open. Vance pushed the heavy metal door inward, revealing a cramped, airless room filled with forgotten cases, filing cabinets, and the heavy scent of mildew and decaying paper. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. Blackwood County's graveyard of unanswered questions, Vance muttered, flipping on the light switch. Ramirez grimaced. And it smells like it. They found the Holloway file almost immediately, labeled in faded handwriting, Case 1987-2003, Holloway family disappearance, unsolved. The file was thicker than most, bulging with reports, photos, and handwritten notes. Vance pulled the file out, laying it on a wobbly table. The first few pages were standard, victim profiles, initial search efforts, witness statements, or lack thereof. There were grainy photographs of the Holloway farmhouse, eerily abandoned, its porch light still on, a child's bicycle fallen in the yard. No signs of forced entry, no struggle outside, Ramirez read from a report. Just, gone. Then they found it. Tucked deep within the file, almost hidden, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was familiar, the chief's. Young, perhaps, from his early days on the force, a time when he was just an officer named Wallace. The chief kept a personal journal for this case? Vance frowned, flipping it open. The entry started shortly after the Holloway disappearance. The early ones were factual, mirroring the official reports. But as Vance turned the pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting became more frantic, the descriptions less objective. October 31st, 1987. Night. The farmhouse, so quiet. Too quiet. Found the radio smashed. And that word. Listen. What the hell does it mean? Wallace, November 2nd, 1987. No leads. The woods around the Holloway property, it feels like they're watching. Like the trees themselves are holding their breath. I keep hearing a faint ringing. Like static. Or something else trying to break through. November 5, 1987. The ringing is getting worse. Headaches. My ears are buzzing. I tried to talk to the other officers, but they just look at me like I'm losing it. They don't hear it. Only me. Vance's finger traced the lines. He heard it too. The static. The siren. Ramirez pointed to a later entry. November 10, 1987. My nightmares are vivid now. Always the woods. Always the sound. It's not static. It's a signal. A call. I went back to the house tonight. Alone. Something was there. I felt it. A presence. I swear I heard a siren. Not from a police car. Something ancient. Primal. The next entry was the most disturbing. It was dated a week later, November 17, 1987. It was short, written in barely legible scrawl, as if the chief had been shaking. Found it. A recording device. By the old well. I listened. It shows them. The Holloways. What happened? I heard it. The sound. It showed me. I have to put it back. Not for anyone to find. Not ever. It has to stay silent. The silence has to grow. Vance and Ramirez exchanged a horrified look. A recording device, Ramirez breathed. The one we found. The chief found it first. And he put it back. He left it there, knowing what was on it. He said, the sound. Not a sound. The sound, Vance emphasized, his mind racing. And it showed me. This isn't just an audio recording. This is something else. Something that affects perception. He flipped to the last page of the journal. It was a drawing, crudely sketched but terrifyingly detailed. It depicted a series of concentric circles, radiating outwards from a central point. Within the circles, small, stick figure-like shapes were being pulled towards the center. And around the outermost circle, almost hidden in the margin, was a symbol, a jagged, angular mark that looked like a broken tuning fork. Underneath the drawing, scrawled in faint pencil, was a single, cryptic phrase: the frequency is the key. The dead zone is the door. Vance slammed the journal shut. He didn't just find a recording, Ramirez. He found a signal. A broadcast. And he understood it. A sudden, sharp click echoed from the archive door. Both detectives froze. The faint glow of the bare bulb in the hallway outside suddenly went dark. Total silence. Then, from the direction of the metal door, a low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump. The electronic pulse, identical to the one on the recorder, filled the basement. The recorder, Ramirez whispered, her hand now firmly on her weapon. It's in the evidence room upstairs. How can we hear it down here? The thump-thump-thump grew louder, moving closer. It wasn't coming from the recorder anymore. It was coming from the darkness just beyond the archive door. Vance drew his pistol, aiming it at the black void. "Chief," he called out, his voice betraying a hint of tremor. "Is that you?" No answer. Only the insistent, vibrating pulse, now accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine. The static siren was no longer just on a tape. It was here, in the cold, silent depths of the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department. The thump-thump-thump of the electronic pulse vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that felt less like audio and more like an internal tremor. The cold, damp air of the archive seemed to be condensing into a dense, palpable dread. Vance kept his pistol steady, pointing toward the black square of the doorway. Ramirez, her own weapon drawn, whispered, "It's not footsteps, Vance. It's too regular. It's electronic, but it's moving." Suddenly, the high-pitched whine, the static siren, returned, louder this time. It pierced the air, causing a sharp, intense pressure behind their eyes. The bare light bulb they had used to illuminate the archive exploded with a muffled pop, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Vance and Ramirez were blinded for a split second, relying solely on their hearing. The metallic pulse was now directly in front of the doorway, and the air temperature plummeted instantly, sucking the warmth from their skin. "Flashlight!" Vance yelled, his voice strained. Ramirez fumbled for the heavy-duty mag light clipped to her belt. She clicked it on, the narrow, powerful beam slicing through the darkness. The beam landed on the space directly outside the archive door. There was no person. There was no Chief Wallace. Instead, hovering 3 feet off the ground, was a shimmering, elliptical tear in the air. It wasn't light, but the absence of light, a perfectly ovular shape of absolute blackness that seemed to absorb the flashlight beam. Around its edges, the air visibly warped and writhed, like heat rising off asphalt, framed by faint, intermittent arcs of pale blue electricity. The source of the rhythmic pulse, the static siren, was emanating from the vortex. "What in God's name is that?" Ramirez choked out, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand was shaking, but her weapon remained aimed. "The door," Vance breathed, remembering the chief's frantic note. "The dead zone is the door. That's what the frequency opens." A portal. The dark oval expanded slightly, and the static siren peaked, hitting a note so high and resonant that the old file cabinets lining the walls began to rattle violently. The raw, terrifying noise made Vance feel disoriented, like his inner equilibrium had been destroyed. Then, from the absolute blackness of the vortex, something emerged. Not a monster, not a ghost, but a sliver of material reality. It was a section of a human arm, pale and desiccated, wearing the sleeve of a wool cardigan, the same cardigan pictured in one of the Holloway family photos. The arm extended, twisting unnaturally at the elbow, and dropped something onto the concrete floor of the basement. The static siren abruptly stopped. The electronic pulse ceased. The tear in the air vanished with a sound like a wet suction cup being pulled free. Silence returned, thick and absolute, broken only by their ragged breathing. Ramirez slowly lowered her weapon, the beam of her flashlight fixed on the object dropped by the severed arm. It was a small, crudely whittled wooden toy, a tiny bear, the kind a child would carry everywhere. The official Holloway file stated that the youngest daughter, Sarah Holloway, always carried a homemade wooden bear her father had carved. Vance walked toward the object, his senses screaming danger, but his investigative instincts overriding his fear. As he got closer, he saw a small, almost invisible mark carved into the bear's stomach. It was the same jagged, angular symbol the chief had drawn in his journal, the broken tuning fork. "It's not just a sign," Vance muttered, picking up the bear with gloved hands. "It's a brand. A signature." The portal, it brought back a toy from a family that vanished in 1987, Ramirez said, her voice hollow. "They didn't just disappear. They were pulled out." Vance turned the wooden bear over. On its back, carved in minuscule letters, was a set of numbers that weren't a date or a phone number. They were too long and precise. $41.7820, -78.3490 coordinates, Vance stated immediately. Specific latitude and longitude. Not the dead zone. Somewhere else. He pulled up a map application on his phone, typing in the coordinates with trembling fingers. The map zoomed in, locating the point. It was deep within the dense, restricted state park bordering Blackwood County, a place notoriously difficult to access, known only as the Broadcast Peak. "This is almost 50 miles north of here," Ramirez said, leaning over his shoulder. "Why would it give us a new location?" Vance looked at the symbol on the bear, the terror replaced by a cold, sharp determination. The chief didn't just put the recorder back. He found the coordinates and kept them secret. He knew where the signal was broadcasting from. He looked at the open file and the chief's journal. The Holloways were taken, maybe used as some kind of fuel for the signal. And Liam Bell vanished right where the chief hid the original device. Liam was a tether, another victim pulled into whatever system this is. A floorboard creaked above them, followed by the heavy, deliberate tread of boots. It was too slow, too heavy to be either of them. Ramirez raised her gun again. "Vance, someone's here." "I know," Vance said, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He already knew who it was. The rhythmic pulse had faded, but the chilling sensation of surveillance remained. The chief knew we'd find the archive eventually. He was waiting. The footsteps stopped directly above the archive entrance. A muffled, familiar voice, Chief Wallace's, came through the ceiling, calm and utterly devoid of emotion. "You should have left the silence to grow, Elias. Now you've tuned the receiver to the wrong frequency." A sudden, deafening mechanical grinding began from the main floor above, the sound of heavy equipment being dragged. The chief wasn't just observing them. He was preparing to lock them in. The grinding above them intensified, the sound of metal scraping concrete. Chief Wallace was clearly moving something heavy, likely a large piece of furniture or perhaps a deactivated vending machine, to permanently block the archive's only entrance. "He's sealing us in," Vance snapped, pocketing the wooden bear and the coordinates. "We don't have time for a standoff, Ramirez. We have to go." Ramirez kicked a stack of old folders in frustration. "Go where?" "The only door is upstairs." "And the window?" "Wait. There is no window." "There is," Vance corrected, pointing his flashlight beam at the far corner of the room, behind a leaning shelf of ancient mugshot books. "The maintenance hatch. It leads to the sewer line, runs straight out the back of the building." He and Ramirez shoved the heavy metal shelf aside, revealing a small, rusty metal grate set low into the wall. It was meant only for plumbing access, barely large enough for a person. "Crawl space? Seriously, Vance?" Ramirez coughed, waving away a cloud of dust. "It's better than being buried alive by the chief," Vance said grimly. He jammed the butt of his pistol into the grate, prying it loose with a screech of rusted metal. The air that rushed out smelled foul, of sewage and damp earth. Above them, the chief's voice, amplified by the heavy machinery, boomed through the ceiling. "The frequency requires silence, Elias. Total isolation. I've been maintaining the signal for 40 years. Don't ruin the broadcast." Vance didn't waste another second. He slid feet first into the narrow opening. The space was tight, filled with cold, muddy water and jagged pipes. Ramirez followed immediately behind him, the small beam of her flashlight casting erratic shadows. They crawled for what felt like an eternity, the sound of the chief's increasingly frantic pounding above them slowly fading behind the layers of earth and concrete. Finally, Vance felt a rush of cold, fresh air. He pushed the rusted cap of a drainpipe and emerged into the dense, overgrown brush behind the sheriff's department. Ramirez scrambled out after him, gasping for breath. Both were soaked, covered in muck, but alive. "He's completely lost it," Ramirez said, wiping mud from her face. "He's been hiding the door and feeding the signal for decades." Vance pulled his department-issued satellite phone from a waterproof pocket in his vest. The phone, a model specifically designed for search and rescue operations in dead zones, had a small, directional antenna. He typed in the coordinates from the wooden bear, $41.7820, minus 78.3490. "The broadcast peak," Vance said, looking at the GPS map. "It's a 5-hour drive, mostly logging roads. We need a vehicle that can handle it, and we can't use the patrol cars. The chief will be watching the radio." "My personal truck," Ramirez offered. "It's parked 6 blocks away. Off-grid, heavy-duty suspension." As they moved quickly away from the station, Vance pulled out the black audio recorder from the evidence bag. He held it up, looking at the faintly glowing power indicator. "The chief called the signal of the broadcast. He called us a receiver. The siren isn't a sound warning us of danger. It's a key. A tuner." "A tuner for what?" "Look at the chief's drawing," Vance said, pulling the journal from his coat. He pointed to the concentric circles and the broken tuning fork symbol. The chief's fear wasn't about the people who vanished. It was about the space they vanished into. He paused, a chilling thought solidifying in his mind. What if the dead zone on Highway 17 isn't a place where radio waves can't reach? What if it's a place where the electromagnetic spectrum is being occupied by something else? Something broadcasting on a frequency we call static. They reached Ramirez's truck, a beat-up, dark blue pickup. Vance tossed the evidence inside. The recorder and the coordinates are the key. The siren is the specific frequency. We need to go to the source of the broadcast. The broadcast peak. Ramirez slid into the driver's seat, her expression now hard and focused. And what do we do? When we get there? Tune the radio to the static siren and open another void? No, Vance said, buckling his seatbelt and holding the recorder like it was a live wire. We find whatever the chief is broadcasting to, and we turn it off. We close the door he's been keeping open. As they sped out of town, leaving the silent, darkened sheriff's department behind, Vance turned on the recorder one last time. The rhythmic electronic pulse, the heartbeat, was louder than ever. He adjusted a small dial on the side of the device, just a fraction of an inch, trying to mimic the siren's pitch. The pulse stopped. Silence, then, from the recorder, a single, clear, agonizing scream, Liam Bell's, followed by a voice, no longer distorted, but terrifyingly clear and familiar. You tuned in, Elias. Welcome to the other side of the silence. It wasn't Liam Bell. It was Chief Wallace. Not the one they knew, but his voice from the 1987 recording. The chief wasn't just sealing them in. He was the first victim, a tether, a host. The drive was brutal. Ramirez pushed the old pickup truck hard, tearing down dilapidated logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The fog had thinned, replaced by the deep, moonlit chill of the high woods. The satphone GPS was their only guide, steadily ticking down the distance to the coordinates, the broadcast peak. Vance sat with the black audio recorder on his lap, the wooden bear clutched in his hand. He hadn't played the recording again. The chief's final, clear words had settled over him like a shroud. You tuned in, Elias. Welcome to the other side of the silence. The chief. Wallace, he found that thing in 87, Ramirez said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, breaking the tense silence. He found the recorder, listened to it, and that thing got inside his head. He's not guarding the portal, he is the portal's gatekeeper. Or he's just a broadcast antenna, Vance corrected, his eyes fixed on the forest blurring past the window. The journal said the frequency is the key. He tuned into it, and whatever was on the other side replaced him. The Wallace, we knew, was just 40 years of maintenance. His job was to ensure the silence grew until the signal was ready. As they climbed higher, the truck's engine began to strain. Then, the electronic interference started. Not the siren or the pulse, but a low, persistent humming that vibrated through the truck's chassis and into their teeth. The GPS screen started to flicker violently, the numbers dancing. We're getting close, Vance said. The broadcast is overpowering our electronics. Ramirez pulled the truck off the main track and up a hidden, extremely steep service road indicated on Vance's map, a decommissioned Firewatch route. They had to continue on foot. They grabbed a trauma kit, more powerful flashlights, and their rifles. Vance took the recorder and the wooden bear. The final mile was uphill, through rough, thorny brush. The humming grew into a full, agonizing drone. It felt like being trapped inside a giant, malfunctioning radio. Finally, they emerged onto a small, flat clearing at the summit. In the center of the broadcast peak stood a decaying metal tower, an old, abandoned radio antenna from the 1950s, rusted and leaning precariously. Its parabolic dish pointed straight into the night sky, and at the base of the tower, illuminated by their flashlights, was the broadcast station. It wasn't a complex, high-tech operation. It was a makeshift array of ancient, cobbled-together electronics. Dozens of old car batteries, wired together, powering a heavy, antique radio transmitter. Next to it, a mess of copper wiring snaked into the earth, attaching to the base of the massive antenna tower. The entire arrangement was humming, vibrating with the noise that had plagued their drive, and standing next to the transmitter, calmly adjusting a large, analog dial, was Chief Wallace. That he was wearing his full, heavy police uniform, but he looked impossibly aged, his skin like stretched parchment over bone. His eyes, however, were wide and disturbingly clear. They were not the eyes of the man they knew. He looked up at them, not with surprise, but with calm inevitability. "You shouldn't have come here, Elias." "You interrupted the silence," the chief said, his voice flat, emotionless. Vance raised his rifle, the weapon shaking slightly in his grip. "Wallace, shut it down." "What are you doing?" "I am maintaining," the chief replied, stepping away from the transmitter. "I heard the sound in 87. It taught me the nature of the dead. They don't want peace, they want to be heard. But the air is crowded. So we cleared a frequency." He gestured toward the humming equipment. "This is the echo chamber. The siren is the tuning fork. It vibrates the veil. When the frequency is hit just right, the signal is strong enough to pull things from the other side. Like Liam Bell, like the Holloways." Vance glanced down at the wooden bear in his hand, then back at the chief. "Where are they? Where is Liam?" "They are part of the signal now. They are the sound of the silence growing." The chief smiled, a slow, unsettling gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "They are broadcasting from the source. The place where all the signals meet." As he spoke, Vance noticed something terrifying about the chief's uniform. Attached to the lapel, right above his badge, was a small, crudely fashioned pin. It was a jagged, angular piece of metal, bent into the shape of the broken tuning fork. "You're not Wallace," Vance realized, the horror finally sinking in. "You're the signal's ambassador." The chief raised his hands to the sky, ignoring Vance. The humming of the transmitter reached a fever pitch, and the air around the base of the antenna began to distort, just like the tear they saw in the basement. "I have done my job," the chief announced to the empty sky. "The frequency is stable. The broadcast is strong." Vance leveled his rifle. "Ramirez, shoot the batteries. Stop the power." But before Ramirez could fire, the chief reached into his coat and pulled out a duplicate of the black audio recorder. He pressed play. The static siren erupted from the small device, but this time, it was amplified, feeding directly into the massive antenna array. The sound was no longer just painful, it was physically agonizing, a shockwave of raw frequency that slammed into Vance and Ramirez. They dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, their vision blurring. The air around the antenna tower tore open, not into a small oval, but into a massive, pulsating vortex of absolute blackness, 10 feet wide, and through the screaming void, Vance could hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the electronic heartbeat, and the faint, garbled voices of dozens of people, lost, terrified, and calling out for help. They were screaming from the other side of the silence. The sound of the amplified static siren was a physical weapon, battering Vance and Ramirez, pinning them to the ground. The force of the frequency made their teeth ache and their vision strobe with white flashes. Ramirez fought through the pain, crawling toward the power source, the cluster of antique car batteries near the transmitter. "The batteries. We have to sever the connection." Vance, still struggling against the sonic assault, saw the chief, or whatever occupied his body, standing serene before the gaping, 10-foot-wide void. The chief's eyes were locked on the portal, an expression of ecstatic relief on his face. "Don't worry, Elias," the chief called over the deafening wail. "You'll be joining the choir soon. The silence needs more sound." Vance scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his ears. He realized his rifle was useless, bullets wouldn't stop the frequency. He had to stop the broadcast physically. He glanced at the complex wiring connecting the batteries to the main transmitter. He needed something to cut the thick cables that he looked down at the wooden bear in his hand, then at the black recorder. He realized the true weapon was in his pocket. The chief saw Ramirez scrambling toward the batteries and lifted the small, broadcasting recorder toward her. The siren's pitch instantly intensified, focusing its full, agonizing power on her. She cried out, collapsing and covering her ears. "Stop that, Elias," the chief shouted, believing Vance was still trying to intervene. "You are only delaying the inevitable." Vance didn't yell back. He ran toward the chief, not to attack, but to distract. As he closed the distance, he pulled the other black audio recorder, the one he had found in the dead zone, from his jacket. The chief laughed, a thin, chilling sound. "You brought a backup? Foolish. All it does is amplify the sound." "No," Vance gasped, holding the second recorder out. "It tunes the frequency." He jabbed the play button on his recorder, unleashing the recorded sound, the muffled screams of Liam Bell, the wet scrambling, and the original, terrifyingly distorted voice of the chief from 1987. But as the sound played, Vance twisted the small, almost invisible dial he had discovered earlier. He turned it past the siren pitch, turning it counterclockwise, pushing the frequency down, down, down. The two sirens, the broadcasting one and the recorded one, clashed in the air. The chief's siren was high, piercing, and focused. Vance's, now adjusted, was low, vibrating, and jarring. Instead of fighting, Vance's recorder created a powerful electronic feedback loop, a sonic short circuit designed to cancel the broadcast. The chief staggered back, clutching his head. "No! You're breaking the signal." The stability. The massive black vortex behind him began to flicker, contracting violently. The garbled screams inside the portal turned into a single, collective shriek of electronic agony. "Now, Ramirez!" Vance screamed. Ramirez, momentarily free of the full sonic attack, used the heavy-duty, reinforced knife she carried, her multi-tool, to stab through the tangled copper wiring connecting the batteries. Sparks erupted in a blinding flash, accompanied by a tremendous electrical discharge. The energy surged back into the transmitter. The chief was hit by the backlash. He arched his back, a grotesque skeleton of fire visible beneath his skin for a terrifying instant. The broken tuning fork pin on his lapel glowed blinding white before shattering into dust. With a final, ear-splitting crack, the antique transmitter exploded into a twisted wreck of smoldering metal. The humming stopped. The static siren died. The massive, terrifying vortex behind the wreckage shrank rapidly, convulsing like a dying heart. With a sound like a distant, slamming door, the portal vanished completely, leaving nothing but the silent, cold air of the summit. The chief, now just a husk, collapsed into the dirt, twitching once before becoming utterly still. Ramirez crawled over to Vance, both of them breathing hard, their ears ringing with phantom noise. "It's over," Ramirez whispered, looking at the silent, smoking wreckage. "We closed the door." Vance didn't answer. He was staring at the body of Chief Wallace. The skin, moments ago aged and papery, was now rapidly decaying, crumbling into dust, revealing the skeleton beneath. In seconds, all that remained of the chief was a clean, pressed police uniform lying empty on the dirt, a pile of bone-white ash beneath the collar. The signal had been cut, and the ambassador had been rendered inert. Vance slowly stood, grabbing his rifle. The silence on the peak was profound, unnatural. "It's not over," Vance said, his voice raw. He pointed his flashlight toward the empty uniform. He said, "They are the sound of the silence. Liam Bell and the Holloways are still out there, somewhere in that broadcast space. And the frequency isn't gone. We just interrupted the antenna." He held up the black recorder he had used for the feedback. He had tuned it once. Now he knew the frequency. "We need to find out what that symbol means," Vance concluded, staring at the patch of earth where the chief had stood. "The broken tuning fork. That's the true signature of the thing on the other side. And we need to find a way to broadcast a message to the silence itself." The immediate silence on the broadcast peak was deafening, the only sound the wind whistling through the destroyed antenna array. Vance and Ramirez knew they had minutes before the department, now likely in chaos, realized the chief was missing and they were the prime suspects. "We need to grab the evidence and get out," Vance said, his voice flat. He gathered the remains of the chief's uniform, collecting the ashes and the fragments of the shattered pin, the broken tuning fork symbol, into an evidence bag. He also carefully placed the chief's original, broadcasting recorder next to the one he had used to create the feedback loop. "The coordinates led us here, Vance," Ramirez pointed out, surveying the wreckage. "If the chief was just a host, what was the intelligence? What was the entity on the other side? And why did it leave that wooden bear behind?" "A breadcrumb," Vance replied, looking at the small, carved bear he still held. "It led us to the antenna. It was a taunt. And it gave us its signature." He showed her the jagged mark carved into the bear. They drove in silence, descending the rough logging trails, the truck bouncing violently. They needed a secure location, somewhere off-grid where they could analyze the data without fear of interference from the police, who were now actively hunting them, or the lingering effects of the broadcast. Vance directed Ramirez to a remote, abandoned fire lookout tower in a neighboring county, a place he knew from his younger days, a perfect, isolated high-ground bunker, once settled in the dusty, elevated cabin of the lookout. Vance spread out the evidence. He focused on the symbol, the jagged, broken tuning fork. He photographed it, then cross-referenced it with every database he could access through his secure tablet, occult symbols, ancient writing, electrical diagrams, everything. "It looks like a broken circuit," Ramirez observed, staring at the screen. "Or maybe, a tuning device that can only hit 2 notes. Vance nodded. "The chief's journal called it the frequency. I think it's the language of whatever is out there. It's not a symbol of power, it's a symbol of communication." His search finally hit a partial match, a rare, obscure entry in an old physics textbook on fringe radio experiments from the 1920s. Result, the bimodal resonator signal. Proposed theoretical symbol for a transmitter capable of modulating 2 distinct wave types, analog and ethereal, simultaneously. Hypothetically, this bimodal tuning fork could achieve resonance across the established electromagnetic spectrum and the static field of unexplored, non-physical dimensions. "Analog and ethereal," Vance repeated slowly. "The analog is the chief's voice, the screaming. The ethereal is the static siren. The 2-pronged signal is the language." Ramirez pulled out the 2 recorders. "So, this one," she held up the chief's recorder, was broadcasting the capture signal. "High-frequency pull, low-frequency command. How do we send a return signal? A message to Liam Bell?" Vance picked up the recorder he had used for the feedback loop. "The chief's host body taught me how to tune it. I pushed the frequency past the siren's range to create the cancellation. But if I tune it to the sweet spot between the 2 modes, the one marked by the broken fork," he opened the chief's journal again and found the diagram. The broken fork symbol was drawn right over the line separating 2 distinct, yet connected, circles. "It's a bridge," Vance said, his mind racing. "The signal pulls people into the silence, but the siren is a pathway. They can hear us if we broadcast on the correct, 2-pronged frequency." He decided on the experiment. He needed to attempt contact. They carefully set up a simple parabolic dish antenna from the lookout tower's emergency equipment, connecting it to Vance's laptop for maximum amplification and digital clarity. Vance then took the recorder he had used for the feedback loop and began to modulate a new broadcast. He recorded a simple message, "Liam Bell. This is the police. We hear the sound. Can you hear the sound of our voice? Tell us where you are." He then isolated the electronic pulse from the chief's original recorder and layered it under his voice, the physical heartbeat mixed with the human plea. Finally, he used the tiny dial to push the frequency until he created a low, vibrating hum that felt dangerously close to the static siren, but not quite there, the frequency of the broken tuning fork that he sent the signal into the makeshift antenna. the small lookout tower vibrated, but nothing exploded. They weren't transmitting a portal, they were transmitting a message. They waited in utter silence, staring at the laptop screen, which showed the outgoing signal successfully penetrating the electromagnetic noise. After 10 seconds, a sound, so faint it was almost missed, came back through the receiver. It wasn't the agonizing scream. It was a single, tiny, distorted whisper. He, me, it was Liam Bell's voice. And immediately following the whisper, a burst of high-frequency static unlike anything they had heard before. It was an angry, digital shriek, quickly followed by a new, synthesized voice. This time, the voice was cold, sharp, and utterly inhuman. It spoke in a perfectly modulated tone, without a single trace of emotion or distortion. The channel is closed. Do not attempt to tune the receiver. The signal has been secured. The electronic shriek returned, louder, assaulting their equipment. The laptop screen went instantly dark, smoking slightly. They had made contact. And they had been immediately discovered. The entity, the intelligence behind the static siren, was now aware of them and their ability to tune the frequency. It secured the signal, Ramirez breathed, looking at the dead equipment. It knows what we can do. Vance looked out the window, past the trees, toward the distant lights of Blackwood County. It means Liam Bell is still out there. And it means the thing on the other side is intelligent. It communicates. And it just declared war on us. The synthetic, cold voice echoing in the dead equipment, the channel is closed. The signal has been secured, was a declaration of war. Vance and Ramirez knew their small bunker had been compromised. We need to move. Now, Vance stated, already packing their gear with ruthless efficiency. It jammed us immediately. That thing is reacting in real time. It's not just a frequency, it's an intelligence. It's hunting us, Ramirez confirmed, checking the magazine of her rifle. If it could co-opt the chief for 40 years, it can co-opt anyone in Blackwood County. We're on our own. They sped away from the lookout tower, leaving a trail of dust on the remote roads. Vance knew their next move had to be their last. They couldn't rely on subtlety, they needed overpowering force. If the chief's antenna was the point of broadcast, we need something bigger, Vance explained, pulling out a map of the county's infrastructure. A massive antenna, capable of overriding any signal it throws at us. We need to create a signal so loud it rips the veil. He pointed to a location on the map, the Blackwood Dam hydroelectric plant. It wasn't just a dam, it contained a secondary emergency transmitter tower, designed to maintain communications during catastrophic regional power failures. It was the most powerful, centralized antenna in the county, and it was rarely used. Security there is minimal, Ramirez said, her eyes tracing the route. But the power output, if we feed that thing's frequency into that main transmitter, it could blow the entire county's grid. Or it could open a channel large enough for us to pull Liam Bell back through, Vance countered. The chief used a low-power, antiquated system for 40 years. If we use the dam's antenna, we can hit that broken fork frequency and hold the connection long enough to retrieve our people. The plan was a desperate gamble. They would break into a government facility, tamper with a massive electrical infrastructure, and risk global attention, all based on a hunch about a dimensional siren and a possessed police chief. As they drove, Vance began preparing the core of the attack, a modified frequency pulse generator. He took the two black recorders, wired them into a small, portable military-grade speaker he carried, and linked that speaker to the input jack of his secure tablet. The chief's recorder provided the electronic pulse, the analog heartbeat, and his recorder provided the modulated human voice, the ethereal plea. He studied the diagram in the chief's journal. The two circles, separated by the broken tuning fork. He had to create that perfect, resonant bridge. He focused on the key component, the wooden bear. It was a tangible object from the other side of the silence. He scraped tiny shavings from the bear and placed them directly onto the magnetic heads of the military speaker. If this thing is about sound and frequency, maybe it needs a physical, resonant object to carry the counter-signal, Vance theorized. They reached the Blackwood Dam just after midnight. The vast concrete structure rose up like a sleeping giant, casting deep shadows across the moonlit reservoir. The emergency antenna tower, a hulking structure of steel lattice, stood sentinel on the roof of the main power station. Ramirez easily disabled the rudimentary gate locks. They moved quickly through the silent facility, finally reaching the secured transmission room beneath the tower. "I can bypass the security mainframe," Ramirez said, pulling out her hacking tools. "But once that transmitter fires up, the whole building will know we're here. We have maybe 3 minutes of broadcast time before the regional authority shuts everything down." 3 minutes is all we get, Vance confirmed, connecting his makeshift frequency pulse generator to the massive transmitter control panel. He looked at the timer on his tablet. 180 seconds that he had one chance to hit the frequency precisely and hold it. Vance took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the activation switch. He looked at Ramirez, who nodded, her face grim but resolute. "Liam Bell, Holloway family," Vance whispered. "We're coming for you." He activated the transmission sequence. The room roared to life. Relays slammed shut, and a powerful, deep hum filled the air as the dam's emergency power surged into the antenna. The lights in the transmission room began to flicker violently, overloading from the power draw. Vance pressed the play button on his modified generator. The counter-broadcast exploded from the speakers and into the main transmitter, his own recorded plea, layered with the chief's electronic heartbeat, all vibrating at the perfect, dissonant frequency of the broken tuning fork. The sound was unbearable, a physical shockwave of mixed realities. The walls of the concrete room began to weep fine dust. Vance watched the signal meter on the control panel spike into the red zone. The transmission was successfully breaching the electromagnetic spectrum, reaching into the silence. Then, through the speaker, a return signal, a chorus of agonizing, desperate voices, a digital riot of sound. But cutting through the noise, a familiar, terrified shriek, Liam Bell's. "It's here. It's looking. The black hole." And right behind his scream, the cold, synthetic voice of the entity returned, louder, angrier, right in their ears. "I am secure. I am the channel. You will be purged." The lights in the room completely failed. The transmission room was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the frantic flashing of the red alarm lights on the control panel. Darkness swallowed the transmission room, heavy and absolute, broken only by the angry, flashing red lights of the emergency alarm. The air was thick with the ozone smell of electrical overload, and the constant, high-pitched ee of the alert lights. The entity's voice boomed through the speakers, no longer confined to the tablet, but reverberating from the very metal walls of the dam. "I am secure. I am the channel. You will be purged." The counter-broadcast, Vance's voice, the heartbeat, the resonant hum, was still fighting, the green light on his generator flickering weakly, indicating their signal was reaching Liam Bell. "Ramirez. Keep the power flowing," Vance yelled, tearing the cover off the control panel and exposing the complex wiring inside. "I can't," Ramirez shouted back, fighting to keep her hands steady on the power conduit switch. "The feedback is surging. The grid can't handle the frequency clash." The entity was fighting back not with physical force, but with electromagnetic violence. The frequency of the static siren, now amplified by the dam's powerful transmitter, was overloading their equipment and their minds. Vance looked at the signal meter. They had 30 seconds left before the automatic emergency shutdown cut power to the entire facility. He focused on the source of the entity's power, the massive antenna array on the roof. The entity wasn't in the room, but it was broadcasting its will through the facility. Suddenly, a new sound erupted, a rhythmic, sharp metallic clicking, coming from the ceiling directly above the transmission panel. Ramirez aimed her flashlight up. The steel access hatch to the main antenna mast was rattling violently, the heavy bolts unscrewing themselves with impossible speed, driven by the resonant frequency. "It's opening the hatch," Ramirez screamed. It's trying to get closer to the power source. As the final bolt spun free, the hatch was violently ripped open. A rush of cold, high-altitude air blasted down, smelling of lightning and ozone, and then, the sound. Not a voice, not a siren, but the distinct, chilling, wet scrambling sound they had heard on the original recording, the sound that followed Liam Bell's whimpers. A black, viscous coil, dripping with reservoir water and smeared with rust, snaked down through the opening. It was segmented, slick, and impossibly fast. It wasn't a biological creature, it looked like a bundle of thick, wet cables and nerves, unified and directed by pure, resonant malice. Fire! Vance yelled. Bringing his rifle up, Ramirez opened fire immediately. The copper-jacketed rounds tore into the coil, sending dark, oily fluid splattering across the walls. The coil recoiled, letting out a shriek of static feedback. But it didn't stop. It lunged, wrapping itself around the main power conduit, the very cables Vance needed to access. Vance knew they couldn't waste time fighting the physical manifestation. They had to hit the transmission frequency hard, right now. He bypassed the failing automated systems and manually jammed the main transmission key. He turned the dial on his generator to max power. Regardless of the consequences, the sound that followed was catastrophic. The counter-broadcast peaked, a raw, screaming distortion of human voice and electronic pulse. The lights in the dam's entire facility exploded outward in a chain reaction of shattering glass and electrical fire. The room plunged into utter blackness. Vance felt a sickening, pulling sensation, not in his gut, but in his mind. The air around him shimmered. He saw, not with his eyes, but with a terrifying internal vision, a vast, silent, black void, and the faint, struggling figures of people, Liam, the Holloways, caught in a frozen, eternal loop of despair. He was seeing the other side of the silence. A single, clear image flashed into his mind, Liam Bell, not screaming, but calmly placing the recorder and the shoelace by the dead zone. The entity wasn't just pulling people, it was forcing them to leave tethers, clues designed to pull the next investigator into the loop. Liam had left the clues because the entity made him, and now, the entity was focusing its full power on Vance, trying to force him to be the next link. Leave a tether, Elias. Become the next silence, the voice commanded directly into his skull, overriding his thoughts. Vance fought through the mental assault. He thought of the wooden bear, the physical object from the other side. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small, carved bear, and with a grunt of pain, he jammed the bear directly into the sensitive wiring of his frequency pulse generator. The wooden object, vibrating at the exact resonant frequency of the broken tuning fork, caused a final, massive discharge. The small generator unit exploded into a blinding flash of green light. Simultaneously, through the ruptured access hatch above them, a massive, agonizing shriek of static ripped through the room. The black, cable-like coil instantly withered, snapping back up into the opening, retreating from the unbearable counter-signal. The power died. The entire dam went silent. In the absolute darkness, Vance heard a sound that wasn't static, not a scream, but a heavy, wet thud and a muffled groan. Close by, Ramirez frantically clicked on her tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the smoke, illuminating the floor. Lying on the dirty concrete, tangled in a mess of wires and smoking metal, was Liam Bell. He was naked, pale, and shivering violently, but alive. Vance. We did it. Ramirez cried, rushing to Liam. Vance stood rigid, staring at the empty, smoke-stained access hatch. The silence was back, but now it felt different. It was heavy, hostile, and utterly focused on them. He realized the entity hadn't been purged. It had been silenced, pushed back into its realm. But it had dropped Liam Bell like a hot coal during the overload. Vas Vance took a step toward Liam, a small, dark shadow detached from the ceiling near the access hatch. It was a fragment of the black coil, small and almost invisible against the soot. It dropped onto Vance's shoulder. He didn't feel pain. He felt a sudden, profound understanding. The entity hadn't lost. It had simply found a better, more portable antenna. The dam's power was dead, leaving the transmission room in absolute, cold darkness. save for the frantic beam of Ramirez's flashlight illuminating the shivering form of Liam Bell. The rescued hiker was curled on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Ramirez looked up, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We need to get him out of here, Elias. And we need to go before the National Guard shows up." Vance didn't move. He stood, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He could still hear the rapid, internal metallic clicking, not outside, but inside his own head, a feeling like a gear engaging. "Elias?" Ramirez asked, her relief instantly evaporating. "What's wrong?" Vance lowered his hand and slowly brushed the soot from his shoulder where the dark, coiled fragment had landed. The skin beneath was clean, but he could feel a new, subtle, high-frequency vibration emanating from the very core of his chest. That he opened his mouth to speak, to tell Ramirez they needed to call the FBI, to report the death of the chief, to explain the dimensional rift, but the words that came out were not his. "The channel is open, Ramirez. The host is ready." The voice was low, resonant, and disturbingly familiar, the synthetic, emotionless cadence of the entity. Vance's eyes were wide with his own terror, his mouth moving independently of his will. Ramirez froze, her flashlight beam fixed on Vance's face. "Elias, stop that. That's not funny." Vance wanted to scream, to apologize, to tell her to run. But he couldn't. His body was locked in place, the black fragment, the new tuning fork, now fully integrated into his nervous system. The previous antenna was obsolete. Vance's voice continued, a chilling monotone. "Unstable. You have provided a superior model. A living nexus. Congratulations, Detective Vance. You have become the new dead zone." Ramirez slowly raised her rifle, her eyes filled with cold, professional fear, replacing the personal bond they shared. She knew exactly what she was seeing. The same vacant, ancient eyes of Chief Wallace, now staring out from the face of her partner. "Vance," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "if you're in there, fight it. You broke the signal once. The signal is unbroken. It is now amplified and localized," the entity inside Vance replied. He took a deliberate step toward her. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, colder. Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump emanated from Vance's chest, the signature electronic heartbeat. He was broadcasting the signal from within. "We have learned from the previous mistakes. No more external transmitters. No more long-distance broadcasts. We will pull the silence to us. Starting with your witness." Vance's hand moved with lightning speed, snatching Liam Bell's unconscious form from the ground. Ramirez didn't hesitate. She fired. The round struck Vance squarely in the shoulder. He staggered back, the physical pain briefly overriding the entity's control, allowing a raw, terrified grunt, Vance's true voice, to escape his lips. "Ramirez. Run. The silence must be preserved." The entity's voice was struggling with Vance's own, two terrible echoes fighting for control of his vocal cords. Ramirez saw her opening. The pain had bought them a fraction of a second. She grabbed the evidence bag containing the wooden bear and the two black recorders, shoving them into her coat. She looked at Vance, the man she trusted, the partner she respected, his face contorted in a silent, desperate battle. She knew she couldn't save him. "Not yet." "I'm not running, Elias," she said, backing toward the facility exit. "I'm finding a way to tune the static out of you." She saw a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, a final, human spark, before they glazed over again, replaced by the chilling, calculating void. "You will fail, officer. You have the frequency, but you lack the power. And the channel closes now," the entity declared. Ramirez turned and sprinted, disappearing into the maze of abandoned corridors. Vance stood alone in the transmission room, the shivering Liam Bell in his grip. The subtle thump-thump-thump of the internal pulse grew louder, resonating with the raw, chaotic static of the dark room. Vance raised Liam Bell high above his head, holding him over the shattered access hatch. He was ready to throw him into the silence, but as the entity prepared to claim its prize, Vance, deep within his own mind, saw the image of the broken tuning fork from the chief's journal. Not as a symbol of communication, but as a flaw. A weak point. A design failure. He focused his remaining will on that flaw, forcing a physical reaction. A single, excruciatingly high-pitched whistle erupted from Vance's own lungs, not the full siren, but a desperate, uncontrolled feedback screech, the sound of his human voice attempting to shatter the frequency occupying his body. The sound shocked the entity. It dropped Liam Bell, who slid harmlessly to the ground. Vance staggered against the control panel, clawing at his own throat. The internal entity reacted instantly, suppressing the resistance. Unacceptable. Silence. Vance's hand fell limp. The painful screech stopped. The only sound was the clear, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the new dead zone. The entity in Vance's voice declared his ultimate purpose: I am Elias Vance. And the broadcast has just begun. Ramirez burst out of the dam's main entrance, the terrified form of Liam Bell slung over her shoulder. She made it 50 yards before dropping Liam onto the mossy earth, her heart hammering against her ribs. She glanced back at the monolithic dam, now plunged into total darkness. She could feel the low, persistent vibration of the internal signal, Elias Vance's signal, emanating from the structure. She had to get Liam to safety, but she couldn't leave Vance to become the monster's new Chief Wallace. She needed to create a counter-signal powerful enough to shatter the entity's hold on Vance without killing her partner. She pulled the 2 black audio recorders and the wooden bear from her coat. She knew the secret wasn't more power, but purer resonance. Liam stirred, his eyes darting wildly. The static, it's inside him, it's in the sound, the sound? Ramirez demanded, grabbing the wooden bear. The siren? The pulse? No. The silence, Liam whispered, clutching his head. When they take you, it's not loud. It's the moment the sound stops. The gap between the notes. That's the door. Ramirez looked at the broken tuning fork symbol, the jagged gap. The silence was the frequency. She knew what she had to do. She had to hit the exact moment of silence between the entity's 2 notes. She raced back to her truck, Liam stumbling behind her. She needed a new amplifier, and her truck's old, powerful stereo system was her only chance. She quickly wired the 2 recorders, the entity's pulse and Vance's feedback, into the truck's auxiliary input, using the wooden bear as a final, physical resonator, taping it directly over the main speaker cone. She started the truck's engine, the battery still strong. Liam, get in the back. And cover your ears, Ramirez commanded. She turned the truck around, aiming the powerful headlights directly at the dam entrance. She threw open the driver and passenger doors, positioning the truck's stereo system to broadcast maximum sound toward the building. Ramirez engaged the recording. The speakers blared the warring frequencies, the rhythmic, malevolent heartbeat pulse, fighting against the human plea. She reached for the volume and the truck's internal equalizer. If the silence is the door, I'm going to fill that silence with so much noise, the door collapses. She hit the volume to maximum, then adjusted the equalizer, cutting the mid-range and spiking the high and low frequencies. She pushed the signal into a state of pure, controlled, agonizing dissonance, a violent separation of the 2 notes, specifically targeting the gap where the entity thrived. The truck speakers shrieked, the sound of electronic chaos tearing through the night. The headlights flickered, the truck's internal electrical system struggling. At the dam entrance, Elias Vance emerged. He walked with a smooth, terrifyingly controlled grace, the electronic thump-thump-thump vibrating visibly beneath his shirt. He was holding his service pistol, aiming it at the truck. Vance raised his voice, a perfect fusion of the chief's cold cadence and his own tenor. Ramirez. Stop. The resonance is destabilizing the host. The silence must be restored. No, Elias. The silence is the lie. Ramirez yelled back, climbing onto the roof of her truck, screaming over the tearing frequencies. She grabbed the wooden bear and, with a final surge of adrenaline, ripped it from the speaker cone. The sound instantly changed, the feedback loop, deprived of its resonator, became unstable, violently skipping notes. Vance paused. The entity was confused by the unpredictable shift. Ramirez hurled the wooden bear, the final tether, with all her strength, straight toward Vance. The bear struck Vance in the chest, right over the focus of the internal pulse. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The physical object from the other side, now charged with the chaotic counter-frequency, collided with the internal broadcast antenna. Vance dropped his gun and screamed, a sound that was pure, raw, human agony, completely devoid of electronic static. He thrashed, falling to his knees as a violent, blinding flash of green light erupted from his chest. The entity was being violently purged. Ramirez watched, tears streaming down her face, as the light faded. Vance lay still. She jumped down and ran to him, throwing her tactical light on his body. He was unconscious, his skin burned where the wooden bear had struck, but he was breathing. The dam was silent. The truck's stereo was silent, the speakers blown. The black recorders had gone dark, their batteries dead. It was over. Epilogue. The new dead zone. Ramirez managed to get Liam and Vance to a secure, private clinic she trusted, spinning a tale of a remote electrical accident and an isolated fire. She knew the official report would never, could never, contain the truth. The chief's body was never found. The FBI investigated the dam explosion as an act of domestic terrorism. Ramirez and Vance, after weeks of recovery, were discharged from the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department. They had lost their careers, but they had saved the silence. Weeks later, Vance was sitting in a cheap motel room, staring at the scarred tissue on his chest. Liam Bell was alive, but haunted, forever looking over his shoulder. Ramirez walked in. The chief's journal. The coordinates were right, the frequency was right. But we're still missing something. Vance nodded. The entity didn't die. It retreated. It's still waiting for the next host. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had installed a specialized, encrypted audio filter. He turned it on, holding the phone up to his ear, and there it was, a faint, low, high-frequency vibration, the residual sound of the static siren, still clinging to the electromagnetic spectrum, trying to tune itself back in. Vance looked at Ramirez, his gaze steady.